Hey, this is Dr. Kamran Ali, and today I'll be talking about above the clause, the topic which has been taken from Functional Grammar by Halliday. Let's have a look at our first slide. On this slide, we have a table from Functional Grammar by Halliday, 7.4. It's talking about clauses in a clause nexus. Clause nexus means combination of clauses in a text. Now, we can see there are four terms here: primary, secondary, parataxis, hypotaxis. Primary and secondary clauses means that one clause is the basic one, and another is actually extending the message, the argument in the primary clause. Now, they can be in two relations, two types of relationships, right? The first is parataxis and second is hypotaxis. Parataxis refers to independent relationship, whereas hypotaxis refers to a dependent relationship. Now, you might have studied dependent-independent clauses in your school days. This is almost the same with a slight difference that I'll talk about later. First, you really need to understand that how these two relationships are presented. When the clauses are in the direct relationship, that is parataxis, they are presented by giving the numbers 1 and 2. Secondary clauses are always numbered 2, whereas primary clauses are given number 1. Whereas when they are in indirect relationship, right, they are presented, right, okay, that relationship is presented with Greek letters alpha and beta. Alpha shows that this primary clause is dominant, and beta shows that the secondary clause is depending on that. Let's have a look at one example here. I don't mind if you leave as soon as you have finished, as long as you're back when I need you. Oh my God, such a lengthy clause. Now, here we need to understand the concept of head and modifier as well, because it's a very complex clause, right? And it's really difficult to understand. Now we can see that there got to be one primary and one secondary clause. So when you look at this one, let me use the marker here. Now we can see over here, I don't mind if you leave as soon as you have finished. Now this whole thing, right, is the primary clause, and that's why it's being represented with alpha. Whereas, as long as you are back when I need you, this is the secondary clause, and it is depending on this clause, and that's why it's being shown with beta. Now, this is the broad division of this clause, right? And now the question arises, how do we realize that this is the primary one and that one is the, secondary one, and this one is the independent and that one is the dependent, right? That's slightly tricky, but again, it depends on the meaning you assign to the clause. Now, for example, here, I don't mind if you leave as soon as you have finished. So it seems like that if we can put a full stop here, right? And it's still, this is a meaningful clause, right? Okay. But I can't say I don't mind as long as you're back when I need you. Uh, to say that, I have to remove this whole clause if you leave as soon as you have finished. Right? So that means if you leave as soon as you have finished is also pretty important, right? And that's why it seems to be the constituent with this one, right? Whereas this one can be removed, but probably this one cannot be removed. And if we remove this one, right? Probably the meaning would be different, right? So you can see that if you leave as soon as you have finished, as long as you are back when I need you, right? Somehow, this clause depends on this one also, because only then it gives the full meaning. Otherwise, the meaning would be entirely different that I don't mind as long as you're back when I need you. So, as long as you're back when I need you, right? Uh, that means you're back when I need you. Somebody must have been doing some work, right? So you really need to understand that, okay, somebody must have been doing something and this person is being released. So there got to be one more clause, right? Which must be in relation with that clause. So sometimes we do have lots of clauses embedded, right? Lots of clauses connected to each other, and we need to look at the relationship that they're having with each other, and that's what exactly you got to do. So you're breaking them into two, alpha and beta, based on your observation, based on the way you realize which one is the dominant, which one is the dependent one, right? So in this dominant clause, we can see that we do have a dependent clause as well, and that is if you leave as soon as you have finished. Now this depends on I don't mind. And of course, as long as you are back when I need you, also depends on I don't mind, but it's also somehow depending on if you leave as soon as you have finished, right? Okay. Now, there's a concept of head and modifier. Why is this head? Because we see that it's the constituent, right? And like here, it's difficult to remove if you leave as soon as you have finished. So this is also acting as a dominant clause or a part of the dominant clause, rather, right? So that's why we have termed this whole chunk as alpha. Now here in this picture, you can see that this is head, this is modifier, and this whole huge clause, right, okay, has been broken into two, head and modifier, based on the discussion I based on the observation I shared with you. Sorry for the slip. Okay. Now here we also observe that this part, I don't mind if you leave as soon as you have finished, does have again a primary clause and a secondary clause. So we further break it into two, head and modifier. Now, how are we going to represent it? We know that we do have a primary clause here that's being represented as alpha, right? Which is the outer clause. And the outer clause means that the big chunk, right? The huge chunk has been broken into two, alpha and beta. Now, within this chunk, this alpha, right, we have once again alpha and beta. So we present it this way that we put one alpha, right, that has been taken from here, and we do have an alpha here also. So we put the second alpha just beside that one to show that this is the sub part, or it's you call it what you call it, this must be bracketing sort of thing, right? Okay, there must be a sub part, okay, under this big chunk. Same goes for the modifier. We know that this alpha shows the big part, right? Here, it's coming from here, right? And this one, because it's a modifier, so this one is the beta. So this beta shows this part if you leave as soon as you have finished. Then if you look at this one, as long as you're back when I need you, right? So we see that here we have the big beta that has been taken from the, uh, you know, the big chunk. It's here, right? And it's representing here. Okay. And then we have alpha. Why do we have alpha here? As long as you are back when I need you. Now, this is tricky, right? Because as long as you are back, right, when I need you, this is also kind of dominant, right? Okay, clause, right? When it's attached with this one, because this is conditioning that one, right? Okay, right? So that's why it's being termed as alpha. Now we see that this beta is the bigger part, right? Taken from here. And this one, when I need you, is also beta, right? Of this subpart, right? So this is this part basically, when I need you, when I need you. I believe you've understood that. This is really complicated, but once you start practicing, you'll be comfortable with this. Let's still have a look at some more examples here. Let me remove the markings. Now what's happening here? You need to figure out primary and secondary clauses. Yet someone told me that I must not repudiate my non-fiction because it's saying very much what the fiction is saying. If we just look at this one, we see here, we have got alpha. That means this is the alpha from the big chunk. And then because we have this that I must not repudiate, this one is basically indirect reporting, right? And we talked in a separate section, even during the class, that what is the indirect reporting, right? But we understand that this is beta. Why? It's beta because we see that this one is depending on that one. So we open that, and then within this beta, we have alpha, right? And this alpha is I must not repudiate my non-fiction because this the next very next clause is depending on that one, right? Okay. Then we have beta. Then again, it's saying very much. Again, once we have beta, right? It's saying very much. Uh, Again, it's a dominant clause, right, within this subclause, because the what the fiction is saying, it's depending on that. So this is how like you need to look at the levels, right? So we have a big chunk, then a small chunk, then that small chunk has two parts, then a small chunk that has two parts, then a small chunks that does have uh, two parts or some parts, right? And always remember this beta, right, is from the bigger chunk. This beta is from the bigger chunk. This beta is also from the bigger chunk. Okay, let's go ahead. Let's have a look at one more example here. Okay. Can you analyze this one? Did I skip? Okay, yes, I skipped one. I'm really sorry for that. Yeah, this is the example we were discussing in the class. Our teacher says that if your neighbor has a new baby and you don't know whether it is he or a she, if you call it, well, the neighbor will be very offended. It's a very complex clause, right? Or I would say that it is actually nexus. Um, our teacher says this is alpha. Then we can see that there is a subordination here. So this is again beta. And you already know what does this mean when we put two inverted commas. That means that it was said or it's being reported, right? And you don't know. So here we have again this beta represents the big chunk, and this beta represents, another what you call that uh, uh, secondary clause, right? Okay, or a dependent clause. And then we can see over here that probably within this section, right? Within this chunk, there is an alpha, there is a head, right? Okay, there is uh, there is a dominant clause, right? Then again, we can see because of this subordinator, we can immediately point out that this is again a dependent clause. This is also, and this clause does have a dependent. It a dependent element, and it probably is also acting as a dominant clause for some other clause, right? Most likely this one. So this is how it's done. Now, if you just look at this, this is the second version, of this one, because we can represent it this way, we can represent it this way as well. Here we can clearly see that this is alpha, this is beta, this is the huge big chunk. Then this huge big chunk has a sub chunk which has been divided into again beta and alpha. And then again this chunk beta 1, right, okay, has been divided into um, alpha and beta here. And it has been numbered as well, 1 and 2. This means that there must be a paratactic direct relationship. And this paratactic relationship can be between two dependent clauses as well, right? Okay, so paratactic means this is 1 and that is 2, right? Whenever we have 1 and 2 relation, right? Whenever we have initiating and continuing clauses, right? Okay, then we do have paratactic relation in the clause. Okay, then again alpha and beta. So you can see this subchunk has been divided again, head and modifier thing, right? Here also we can see that we do have head, and this head is being divided into two. That is again beta and alpha, right? So this is how it is done. You have a big chunk, then you have sub chunks, and those sub chunks have betas and alphas. Okay, and every time when you represent it, you do include the uh, letter which represent the big chunk, right? The big gloss, right? I believe that you've understood it now. Try to analyze this one. I'll give you some clues here. Uh, Let me use the annotation, and that probably would help you. You took her umbrella in case it rained. This whole thing, right, is behaving like a constituent, right? Okay, so this can be termed as alpha. It's a big chunk, right? Okay, a part of a big chunk or of the big chunk. When she was leaving. Now, this one is depending on this whole thing. So I can term it as beta. All right. Okay. Now, if we just look at this one, we can see that this can also be broken into two chunks here. She took her umbrella, right? This is again head. So We call it alpha once again. In case it rained, it's this one depending on this one. So this is again beta. So guess what? How am I going to represent this whole thing? Now, this is the question from you. We'll discuss it in the class. Thank you. I hope you've understood everything. If you have any queries, we can discuss in the class. Thank you. Take care of yourself. Allah Hafiz.